Hey, friend, have you ever felt like success was just out of reach? Like everyone else seems to be slaying giants, and yet you're still kind of shaking in your boots? Today, we're diving into the story of David when he was a shepherd boy and when he faced a giant without even flinching. We're going to talk about how we can apply those same principles to conquer our fears now and step boldly into our calling. Let's make the supernatural your new normal. So let's start with 1 Samuel 17. This is the story of David and Goliath. And if you've been in church, you've probably heard the story, but I'm hoping to pull out a few things that may feel fresh and new. So let me talk about the setting. On one side of a hill is the Philistine army. On the other side of the hill is the army of God, the Israelite army. And as they prepared themselves, fully armed, fully trained armies of the Most High God, right on one side, and the Philistine army on the other side, the Philistine army sends down a champion. He is a giant. When he is described, at some point, you need to go look it up and really dig into how big he was, how heavy his armor was, how heavy his sword was, things like that. It's incredible to think how big he was. There is a good reason why the Israelite army was shaking in their boots, sort of, when they looked at him. So this is going on. This has been going on for days. The giant goes down into the valley and he looks at the Israelite army. He says, "Send me your champion. We'll fight, and if I win, then you become our prisoners. And if you guys win, then we'll become your prisoners. We don't all have to fight, just two champions fighting, and whoever wins." Well, hmm, everybody's shaking in their boots. Not even King Saul is choosing to be a champion for the Israelite army. And this goes on for days. Sometime during that time, David's father, Jesse, sends David to take lunch to his brothers who are in the army. And David just so happens, really? God, right? David just so happens to show up at the time that the giant Goliath, begins to taunt the Israelite army. David hears this and he thinks, he's taunting the army of God. How dare he do that? And he gets a little indignant. And I want you to hear what happens. This is in verse 37. Well, no, let's jump down. Let's see, verse 23. In verse 23, this is when David realizes what's going on. He said, "Then as he talked with them," so he's sitting there talking to the army, he's greeting them. Then as he talked with him, there was a champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, coming up from the armies of the Philistines, and he spoke according to the same words. So David heard them, and all of the men of Israel, and they saw the man, fled from him, and were dreadfully afraid. So he looks, Goliath is taunting, and all the men of Israel flee and are afraid. So the men of Israel said, "Have you seen this man who has come up? Surely he has come to defy Israel. And it shall be that the man who kills him, the king will enrich with great riches and give him his daughter and give his father's house exemption from taxes in Israel." Then David spoke to the men who stood by him and saying, "What shall be done for the man who kills the Philistine and takes away the reproach of Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" And people answered to him in this manner, saying, "So shall it be done for the man who kills him." So David's immediate response is, "What? What's going to be done for the man who takes him out?" Like for him, it was like, well, of course we're going to take him out. He's defying God. He is taunting God's army, God's elect people. Of course God's going to take him out. I'm all for it. What will I get if I do that? Like the whole army who's been trained, who has been armored up for days, are shaking in their boots. Yet David, a shepherd boy, is ready to take on the giant without even flinching. How did he do that? Later on, we find out in verse 28 that David's older brother gets a little indignant with him. In 28, it says, Now Eliab, his oldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger was aroused against David. And he said, Why did you come down here anyway? And with whom have you left those little sheep that you take care of? Can you hear the brother thing going on? Like Eliab is like going, You are nobody. You just take care of a little flock of sheep. Who are you to be saying the things that you're saying? I think Eliab is facing um, his own mishap here, his own feeling of guilt for not feeling the bravery that his little brother is having. But I love the way David deals with him. In verse 29, it says, And David said, What have I done now? What on earth have I done now? Is there not a cause? Now that's key. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. Is there not a cause? Then he turned from him toward another and said the same thing. These people answered him as the first ones did. So he turns to someone else and says, Now tell me again what the king's going to give the man who takes out Goliath. I want you to notice the way he dealt with Eliab. First of all, he said, What have I done to you? I've not done anything to you. And then he says, Is there not a cause? That's the first step to making the supernatural natural, is that you have to realize this is a God call on your life. If you're an entrepreneur or a coach and God's called you to serve somebody in that manner, that ideal client is the person and the reason why God is sending you and ordaining you. So I need you to know, I need you to get to that place where you really hone down, is this God's will for me? And that's where you stand. That is firm foundation. Then the next thing that you watch David do is he doesn't try to argue with the crowd. He doesn't try to argue with his brother. He doesn't try to convince his brother. He doesn't defend himself in any way. He just turns away from him. I think a lot of times we find ourselves trying to defend ourselves to people who love us, but are being very negative toward what God is doing in our lives. And we think we have to convince them or argue with them or try to win them over when God says, just do what I asked. Just do what I ask. Don't argue with them. Don't put them down. Don't criticize them. Don't try to convince them. Just show them with your actions. I think it was my father who once said, quit talking and just start showing me proof, right? I remember a time when I told my kids, they weren't obeying about something, but they would say, but I love you, mama. And I was like, show me. Don't just say it. Show me you love me, right? Well, in this instance, David was like, I don't have time to continue to argue with you. I'm just going to show you. And maybe I need to be encouraging you right now that you don't need to convince anybody. Show them that it's a God call on your life, just as David's going to do. So, the first thing that I need you to know, that the reason why David didn't even flinch is because when David was in the field with the sheep, when he had been doing that since he was very young, he spent time worshiping God out there. That's why we know that he wrote psalms, he wrote songs, because and later we find out that he then sings and brings worship to Saul. So we know that he's a worshiper. He wrote most of psalms because those are songs. We know that he spent time in the field with the sheep worshiping, spending time in the presence of God. So that would be number one. Are you spending time with God? Do you hear his voice loud and clear? Have you allowed God to define who you are? Do you know that what you're doing is God's call on your life? Then you need to root down into that. You need to remember that this is God's call in your life. David was able to face a giant that the whole Israelite army was shaking in their boots about, because David had spent enough time with God to know who he was, and who he was not dictated by the actions of others. Can I repeat that? Who he was not dictated by the action of others, because he had spent time in the presence of God. Are you spending time in the Word of God? Are you spending time in the presence of God? Do you spend time in worship? Are you dedicated to um, to time away with God? Are you dedicated to that? Okay. So number two, When he dealt with his brother, he didn't argue, he didn't try to convince, he didn't get stuck in that moment. He just turned away and did what he was called to do. He just turned away. Big. I think a lot of us as entrepreneurs get stuck trying to convince people that really it's not our words that are going to convince them. It's our success, it's our movement and action and determination. Number three, later on in the story in verse 38, he goes to Saul because he has to ask permission of the king to go. And in the process, of course, Saul says, this is a man of war. He's a champion. How are you going to take him out? David then explains with power and strength, God already helped me take out a lion and a bear. This will be no problem taking out this giant. But Saul tries to put his armor and hand him Saul's armor and Saul's weaponry. And David tries to walk around in it for a moment. And then he finally says, look, I haven't tested this. The armor doesn't fit me. This is not who I'm supposed to be. I need to take the weapon that God taught me how to use, the one that took out the lion and the bear, the one that God taught me in his presence out in the field. This is what I need to do. This is my weapon. This is what I want to talk to you, entrepreneur, about is that you need to be very careful about the programs that you're getting involved in and all of the things that you're trying to learn from. I see a lot of entrepreneurs jumping from one freebie to another freebie to this class and to this class. You need to hone down what has God equipped you with? What are your spiritual giftings? Who are you called to? What's your story? What spiritual giftings as well as personality? That's why it is so important for us at Consumed Coaching that we really, really hone down in the beginning as we work with our clients. What is their personality? Who are they called to? What is their story? Because it's where our personality, our story, our experiences, and our skill set, where those all intersect, our spiritual giftings, our calling from God, those all intersect. That is our purpose. And when you know that, then you'll know what weapon you need to be going out into the world with. That's your purpose. That's who God called you to be. So David was able to tell Saul, I can't wear your armor. I cannot use your weapons. I need to use the weapons that God created in me. You need to do the same. It's a good lesson for us to learn. So we all know that David then ran down into the valley and he took out the giant. So I'm going to tell you a little story about me at a time when I was facing my own giant. And God was calling me into that valley to take out a giant. And that giant was a new level in the company that I was working for. It was a level that was very difficult to get to, as one that I had wished for a while, but hadn't really done the work for. And I remember the day that I was leaving a neighborhood after a training, and I thought, wait a minute. My mentor is no different than me. And I remember thinking, everything that he's done, I can learn to do. And I felt the call of God to level up. Now, at the same time that I was getting a little indignant, the fear was hitting me as well. And so, but I decided I was going to follow God. And one of the main things that I did, well, two main things, was I called that mentor and I said, let's have coffee. I need to know what to do. And here's what I did. I told him, I am giving you permission to speak into me, to stop me from doing stupid things, even when I don't understand. I am opening up and saying, please, please, please don't let me make the mistakes that you made in the process. If you can prevent them in me, I'm giving you permission to speak to me, to address me, really. Secondly, I knew that I needed to make this success level not scary anymore. I needed to make this success level normal to me. I needed to make the supernatural natural, right? So I began to enter rooms that were super scary for me and to begin to own that space. Um, I began to hang out with a different crowd, a crowd that what seemed abnormal and supernatural and scary to me was their normal because they had already reached that level. I had to change the rooms that I was in. so that I could make the supernatural my new normal. And it was huge. I actually made that level quicker than I thought, quicker than most people at at that time. I think it was like nearly 6 months. Boom, 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 boom. Something happened. It just began to happen. I was hitting one, two, three, four levels. And before I knew it, I was standing on stage, literally walking in that success, realizing that there really was just a mirage, that wall between this success and this success really was a mirage, that once I started hanging with the people who knew that, that mirage just disappeared. So, what do I want to challenge you with? I want to challenge you with this. Evaluate the rooms that you are currently in. Are they helping you, or are they keeping you small? Number two, intentionally seek out mentors, communities, and environments where your impossible is someone else's normal. And then step three, stay rooted in your faith. Spend time in the presence of God, trusting God to equip you for your next level. Now, I want to leave you with a couple of verses. Proverbs 13:20 tells us, walk with the wise and become wise, for a champion of fools suffers harm. Joshua 1:9, have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So giants are only intimidating to those who aren't prepared. With God, the extraordinary can become your new ordinary. Start stepping into those bold places, because the room that you're afraid of right now might be the one where you find your greatest growth. Now, I want to ask you to do me a favor. I want you to subscribe to the channel. I want you to share the video. If it really resonates with you, share the video with your community, with your friends. If something in here would encourage one of your friends, share it with them. So, like, subscribe, and share, please. And I'll see you next time. Thanks.